And welcome everyone to the monthly mentor panel, Networking Like a Pro. And I'd like to introduce our host, Stacy Devino.
Well, hello, y'all. How you doing? Well, I am so excited today to share with you these wonderful panelists about networking. And we're not talking about through the wires, but it can be too. Really, how do we create personal connection that elevates ourselves and elevates us to be able to achieve our goals, whether that be personal or professional? And so with that, I would love for you to get to know some of our panelists today. And I'm going to start with Bri Crow. It is Bri Crow's mission to be a catalyst of growth, confidence, and connection for SMBs, digital agencies, and growth-minded professionals. Her founder's story started in 2018, and ever since, she's been growing and leading Human Dimensions, a talent attraction and acquisition agency for tech, creative, and executive leaders, and Bri Crow Creative, a brand, content, and photography studio. Previously, Bri spent 10 years in the technical staffing industry in recruiting and sales roles, and was formally recruited to join a cybersecurity startup where she helped build it into a $10 million business in 2 years. She's been featured by Dallas Innovates, Voyage Dallas, and Dynamic Foundations Institute, awarded for Succeed for Serving, nominated for the North Texas Women in Technology Awards, and is a published photographer, and delivers 5-star rated keynote speeches, workshops, and on-air production. Get to know Bri Crow.
Hey guys, thank you so much.
And next is Daisy Mayorga. Daisy Mayorga, a passionate technologist and new co-founder of, and I hope I pronounce this right, but yüda, a company dedicated to empowering equity in emerging technologies. With her Bachelor of Science degree in computer science and experience as a Google Developer Group organizer and Women Techmaker ambassador, she's a champion for an inclusion and diversity in technology, working tirelessly to create a more equitable community. As a project manager at Bitwise Industries, she oversaw multiple projects and ensured their successful completion. Additionally, helped grow the training team and onboarded multiple project manager, furthering Bitwise's mission of empowering underrepresented communities through technology. Prior to Bitwise, Daisy spent 14 years at the world's largest winery, where she gained extensive experience in manufacturing, distribution, training, media, Lean Six Sigma, shout out for my Six Sigma girls, safety and development. Working in the industry, she got to experience firsthand how the fourth industrial revolution shifted the job market in manufacturing to focus more on automation rather than manual labor. Daisy also worked on award-winning technology products, including the development of Spotter, a location scouting app for photographers, with a focus on creating a more equitable and just future through technology. She is thrilled to join yüda to drive change and empower underrepresented communities. Wow, I didn't even know that about you, Daisy. And finally, let's meet Jessica. Jessica Dene Earley-Cha is from a small border town by Mexico and received her bachelor's in sociology, education, applied psychology from UCSB. She spent almost a decade working with at-risk youth and people with mental health challenges. She decided to change fields and graduated from a software boot camp where she learned web development. Jessica was a developer relations engineer for Google Assistant and Android for 5 years. She loves to connect with developers and future developers. Jessica is a Girl Develop It board member, Women Techmaker, former Google Developer Group lead, Women in Voice advocate, Girl Develop It, and Hackbright teacher. You'll find her either spending time with her dog, collecting strawberries, knickknacks, or biking around with her dog, River?
Stacy. I don't know if I've ever heard someone read that out loud. So that made me think. I was just like, oh, it's so different when you read it when you're typing up yourself of like who you are, what you want to say compared to what people how they say it. So thanks.
I know. And you know what? I say one of the best things for being a speaker here is to just capture that moment and play it back for yourself every time you need a little bit of affirmation. Because we all struggle. Struggle bug is real, right? And
oh my gosh. Totally. Side note, I have a doc just for that of like my kick-ass stuff that made me feel cool. I throw that into a doc that way. When I'm not feeling so great, I go to my little doc. Great for when you're doing an interview, like right before interviews to kind of pump yourself up. So just a little side note, do it.
I've got Pump It and the soundtrack from Space Jam for those. Oh, it definitely makes a difference. Well, now that we've gotten to know our lovely panelists, I want to ask our first question. And it's a little bit tied to some of the things that you talked about here, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you are currently in your career? Do you find that you're kind of mid-stage, late stage, don't know? Do you know where you're going next? Do you have an idea? And, really, what has you excited for today?
Is that a Jessica?
That's a anybody. That's an open question.
I saw that you were not muted, so you go for it, Bri.
Okay. Yeah. So in career, I feel like it's kind of hit a second stage of because of entrepreneurship does feel and your everyday is so much different. I kind of feel like there's a second stage happening, but there's also very much a second stage also in my business. So I'm very excited that I'm basically at year 5 here of having my own business. And, I think now it's really in terms of it's really the second wave of actually scaling the business versus building the fundamentals. Now it's a time where we've got the fundamentals in place, being able to hire and actually grow the team. The business is there and the opportunities are there. And so I think that's the next stage in terms of where you look at your career. It's not only moving into management, but it's being able to say, hey, I've put the right things in place and trust that I'm going to be able to introduce that to someone else and say, you understand the business and let's grow it. So I'm never turned down an opportunity to talk about how networking has enabled me to even get to this point. So really looking forward to talking more about that.
I can definitely go. I don't have plans. I used to have plans way when I was younger, but now I'm definitely way more of the, let me just talk to people and see what opportunities are there. And instead of filtering and deciding before you even talk to people whether something sounds good or not, I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll talk to this person, and you just never know. So I'm definitely in a very open kind of space, and it's, in my opinion, has been really helpful for my whole career, going from the nonprofit space into tech. So never thought I would be doing this when I was in college. So I'm also not like, I've done the management thing. I've ran nonprofits. I've worked at big companies. Now I'm working at a small company now where I could do a lot more things and just like tasting different things. So that's kind of where I'm at. Not really, there's not a path laid out, but I'm excited to be discovering what little kind of side corners might be out there. So
love that.
Yeah, I think I might be like in between Jessica and Bri. So I was recently laid off. Our entire company was. So if you heard of Bitwise Industries, they impacted over 900 plus lives. So I actually co-founded a startup in January. So right now, just trying to take that full time, but also open to opportunities. So a big part of that is networking. And I mean, right after it happened, people reached out like, hey, what can I do? Because of the network that I had built. But that's kind of where I'm at. Yeah.
Very cool.
So really, as part of that, or even as, kind of in the past, has networking been a core part of your job, whether or not it's a stated set of responsibilities? And can you kind of go into the different kinds of networking or facets in which it actually affected your ability to, quote unquote, do what you were hired to do?
You go first, Jessica.
Sure. Yeah, I like to view, the thing is, when it comes to the term networking, for me, just I kind of glaze over it. It's oh, it's such a businessy thing to do. And that doesn't speak to my core of who I am. But the elements of networking is something I attach myself to, of connecting with others, seeing how you can align goals, how trying to figure out what people are motivated by, and making those connections. And I really love the people side of it. And so that's kind of how I view it when it comes to networking overall. My last gig, working in DevWorld, it's a lot of working with external folks. So it's a lot of talking to people, seeing what their needs are, and trying to give a good impression of the work that you're doing, the company you're representing, but then also of yourself too. So even when people are oh my gosh, I hate this thing that Google did, yeah, I hear you, me too. But acknowledging pain, but then also how do we make this better? How do we figure this part out? So there's, the networking of trying to identify needs and wants within the larger community, but then also there's that networking part of internally. How do you socialize a lot of your work, and how do you frame it so then you can let people know what you are working on and how that might relate to what they're doing? And so I like to think of it more as connecting people and informing folks potentially what you might be interested in and what your values are. I remember meeting somebody and I really loved how they framed it. When we first met, we were cool, we have similar vibes. And he was very much this is my core things when it comes to supporting people. And he went out his list of 3 things. If there's anything within that space that you are doing, please let me know, because I want to be involved. And I was oh my gosh, I love that. I'm stealing it, because why make it harder for folks to know what you are interested in or what you want to do? Make it easy for them. So that's something that I really enjoyed, and a nice little tangible action item that you could do is just figuring out, not necessarily I want to do this specific thing, but I'm interested in this space, so that people can be able to make their own connections from their own world.
I would love to piggyback off of that, because I think that's something that it's kind of part of my repertoire. And drop in the chat if you consider yourself far more of an introvert, and maybe people are not something that give you energy. Maybe it's something that for you is more exhausting. For me, though, very much like you, in terms of people are my coffee, and I talk about people who do give me energy. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely have to recharge after, big events or big conferences. But drop in the chat if you are the opposite, and it's a heavier lift to be able to get in front of people. Because I think, to your point about mentioning, Jessica, three things that you're interested in, I always talk about my worlds collide between technology, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and entrepreneurship. And so generally, if there's an event related to one of those things, I'm there, or I'm posting about it, or I want to hear about it. And so it's something I bring up in a networking thing. And if you are introverted and it is hard to make that connection with people, you start to find yourself having similar phrases that you're able to repeat, but that they're high value and that somebody is going to be able to repeat it. And it's easier to be oh, think in sound bites. But if you break that down, what does a sound bite mean? It just means one line that you can provide to someone that's really super clear. So couldn't agree more with what you said, Jessica, on that. And it makes it that much more easy if networking to you is terrifying.
And I think the only thing I'll add to that is that for me, yes, I definitely network all the time for my current role as a founder, but I think the opportunity there is an opportunity to learn something that you didn't know before, either about a person or about a new word or topic that you just learned about. So being in the Web3 space now, I'm learning about all kinds of things that I did not know about. And I take the opportunity to ask questions, and that's my form of networking.
Oh my goodness. Curiosity, without a doubt. People are like, you're always so connected and you know so many things. And I'm like, I don't personally know them. I know people who know things.
And that's also, go for it, Bri, so sorry.
Nope, that was it.
Oh, I was just gonna piggyback off of that. People love to talk about what they're interested in. And so if you're an introvert, that's the best way of just like, hey, what do you do? What do you do when you have free time? What is the thing that you would love to be able to do? And let them kind of tell you their story of who they are versus having to try to manage the conversation. So there's a couple little phrases that you could definitely use on everyone that works. So it's like taking all of this, make a little cheat sheet for yourself, and you could just use that everywhere.
Stacy, there was a part of your question I'd love to add to as well. When you talked about like what types of networking, I think you mentioned, are you doing? And I wanted to mention, like, for me, I think there's two ways that I would answer it. A, it's that I've moved to a new city 2 weeks ago, just landed here, whole new part of the country, whole new community to plug into. So there's absolutely me trying to make new connections here. But another side of my networking is that in Dallas, for example, in the Dallas-Fort Worth community, I have long-standing, well-built relationships. So networking in that sense is actually more of the fluff of an ask, like asking for a favor or asking for insight or being able to add more value is far more, I'm not going to say blunt, but like, it's far more clear. There's that different level of networking that hits once you have a little bit of a connection. I'm no longer afraid to be like, hey, by the way, can you make this introduction for me? Hey, by the way, I don't need to be like, hope you're having a fabulous summer. I would love to hear about how, there's a little bit less of that and more like, I know what you're doing. So I'm going to do this for you. And here's what I need on my side. If you know of anything, it's far more direct. And I think those are definitely two different types of networking, because one, you're going to be a little bit lighter with.
Yeah, and I kind of alluded to a little bit on here, but and it ties very much into your like introvert kind of piece as well. So I'm someone who, as people think of me as an extrovert, only because I am very direct and I try to focus on very positive things. But what it is for me is honestly, I am driven by impact and strategy. And so if that impact or strategy, by taking that extra time to build that relationship, to aid that person, to do all of those things, that sustains more than any of the, so it's like you kind of have to figure out what works for you and what part of that relationship building. And to that effect, I guess one of the other parts of networking that we haven't necessarily touched on is championship. And when I said multifaceted in terms of networking, also from the internal side, because as you know, Jessica very much alluded to, was talking about just, hey, I'm interested in this. I'm gonna let this marinate in your brain and for like 3 months, and then it's gonna come back at you. Is really just to use networking as a way to champion what you're doing in a very natural and aspirational kind of way, so that when the conversations come up at the end of the year, it's not, I have to track what I talked to this person about in all of our one-on-ones. It's, oh, I remember they did this, 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 and this. We've been talking about this career progression this entire time. I've heard, what a good job they've done from this, this, and this, and then they've been a champion for other people in that regard. And, when I think about networking internally is probably one of the most valuable ways that a lot of us don't take the time to do, skip levels, get to know your vice president.
I was going to say, honestly, I think we can also get really caught into, you go and make a Starbucks run if you're going into the office with your closest coworker. But if you can occasionally break out of that cycle, and ask, a VP, ask someone in another department, hey, would love to buy you coffee. And you hear about the business from an entirely different perspective. They might be, oh, we're hearing this budget, right? Like you're also gathering information, but the power of being able to like send an invite in a big company when you've never met someone, you don't meet a lot of your coworkers, 10 out of 10. Love that. Internal networking.
So I also wanted to ask, like, did networking help you land either your current job or previous jobs? Like how has your network aided you professionally, both and while doing the job? I know Jessica talked about developer relations, but I'm really curious to know.
You take it, Daisy.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's helped me land every job that I've been in, right? And at Bitwise, prior to that, I was putting on a lot of events for women tech makers, meeting a lot of new people. And I met someone who was like, hey, you would be a great, project manager. And she just kept pushing me to like apply. And I was like, no, like, I'm fine. And finally, one day I was like, okay, why not? I'll try. And that's how I made the transition from developer to project management, is that connection that I made. And somebody saw something in me that I probably at the time didn't see in myself. So I think that's a good way to, a good reason why to network too, is because sometimes people can help you find what your niche is, what you're looking for. And maybe you don't see that. And they, developer relations was like something I'm kind of interested now, but I didn't really know the role until people started talking to me about it. Yeah. So, yeah, always, always be open to have a conversation with people, and you never know what you'll find out.
I love that. I just want to piggyback off of what Daisy was saying, because I think sometimes, at least for me, it's hard to like, well, where do I start? How do I find these people if I'm not in the big company, or if I don't, I know for me, because of my nonprofit background, I really hit hard on the volunteering. I went, ooh, what are communities that have the same goals that I do, that are creating great environments and spaces so I can meet other amazing people, wink, wink. But really trying to figure out, how do you find those groups and volunteering? And it's as simple as going, hey, organizer of this meetup, of this group, I want to help out. How can I volunteer? I know when it was physical events, something I always recommended to people was go to the event early, before you're supposed to be there, and then offer to help set up the chairs, offer to do this. I'd love to offer to do the sign in, because then as people are coming in, everyone sees me and they think I'm someone important. I'm not, I'm just a volunteer, but like it gives people, they see your face and you start making connections over the months. And that's kind of how I started building off. So volunteering, whether it's in the capacity of like physical events, like Daisy was talking about how she was running things, or volunteering with your knowledge, writing blogs, like sharing your own knowledge is a great way to connect with people that might feel more authentic. And that you could kind of have more of a, I have this to offer. What, how can we meet together and support one another?
I love that, because I volunteered, especially as a recruiter, when you're trying to, I wanted to make connections with candidates in a genuine way in the spaces that they interacted with, aside from just calling them. So I volunteered at the Microsoft office, their SQL Server conferences every time, because I would then get a free pass. So then I'd get to join them at lunch. So I was able to check them in. They recognized me, and then it makes the conversation to sit down at their table that much easier. Raise your hand and drop in the chat if you've been laid off currently, if you're in between positions right now, because you're looking for free things that aren't, you want to invest your money in opportunities and things in a really intentional way. And by volunteering, it's a great way to be able to mention it in interviews and say, I went to this conference or I did this thing, but it's also free and it's networking built in. So 10, yeah, definitely recommend, and just voice the exact same thing that both of y'all just said, for sure. But in terms of networking as part of my current job, I would literally not have a business. I had not had a side hustle and quit a job because my side hustle was getting so busy. I had been laid off, and I had customers say, call me, and my company didn't tell them that they had laid me off. So I had clients literally calling my cell phone because we were that close saying, hey, what's up? And I was like, I was the one breaking the news to them that I'd been laid off. And they were like, well, okay, can you send me your contract, or can we work something out? Because I worked with them to work with you. And I was like, well, I mean, sure. They're like, so, and I was like, let me just put together an LLC really quickly. At the time, I thought it'd be super cool because it was right around the holidays. Let me just be self-employed for like 3 months. And so I put together an LLC, and existing clients of mine, because I'd been laid off, no non-compete. And so 3 months of just like, it'd be cool to be self-employed for 3 months. I wouldn't be able to have a business that survived through COVID, that's a services-based business, without having a network that I could continue to build and leverage. And that's the only reason 5 years later that I am here today. So, but that's because I also spent nights and weekends for many, many years going to user groups, conferences, meetups, and being in the rooms. And that's exactly what I attribute to being 5 years in business, without a doubt.
I'm pretty sure that's how we met, Bri.
It's from the Android meetup, I want to say.
Yeah. The first time. And then we also ran into each other at some Dallas startup events, I want to say in like 2018 or something like that.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm grateful for this reconnection. It's proof of it.
Everything's proof of it, right? No one lives in Dallas, I think, right? Other than our lovely hosts and me.
Kevin might be the furthest. I saw your comment at the very beginning. You're in Canada. You might be our furthest connection as part of the meetup tonight, at least.
Oh, we do have a Dallas person.
Well, I mean, I am, of course, right? But, it's kind of just amazing what networking just does in terms of elevation. But I know we talked a little bit about how does that actually present, right? Like, it's showing engagement. It is evidence of engagement and passion in the thing that you do. You could be amazing. I have known so many amazing developers that have a network that borderline is just their cousins. Like, might be some second cousins in there, but it's cousins, right? Like, how do you, this person that, like, quite honestly puts me to shame, have like 75 connections on LinkedIn? And all of these kinds of things. And then, when push comes to shove and we get into a tough job market, that's only 75 people you have to tap. That's 75 people that you have to ask for an introduction. That's 75 people that can provide you advice. How powerful is it when you can say, no, I have 1,500 people that I can ask for advice, 1,500 people I can, and that's the level and better of our panel here. And it makes an absolutely huge difference. And it's because you're engaged, and it shows in your network. It shows in the way that you network. So, as part of that kind of proposition, how valuable do you find your network, not just in your professional life? We've talked a lot about professional, but also in your personal life. I don't know if this necessarily gets brought up as much in terms of, the kind of networking that we're talking about, but how has it impacted you personally, if you're willing to share?
I would love to answer this. Oh my gosh. So I had a full-on moment a couple of weeks ago in this move where I realized I was at a wedding reception party for a couple that I hadn't connected. I mean, like, we knew each other and had known each other from a long time, but I'm at this wedding reception here in Seattle. because they realized that I was here, but we met each other in Dallas through the startup and entrepreneur community back in 2016, I want to say. And I'm there with other friends from the startup and entrepreneur community. And then I realized that within the last 2 weeks, I had stayed with, visited, been at a party with, or hung out with people that were now my friends that I met through. And my mom's like, well, how did you know this person? Well, how did you know that person? And I'm like, oh, well, the startup community. Oh, at this one tech event. And she was like, oh my goodness, and so it really recently, I had not realized, I had worked in restaurant jobs. And when you work restaurant jobs, for example, you make a ton of friends. Your friends, you're hanging out with them all the time. But then when you get into professional setting, I feel like, you may not always like your coworkers, or you're like, we spend enough time together, like we're good. But that's what communities, I do feel like I've absolutely made long-term, lifelong friends. And I hadn't taken a step back to realize like how we all knew each other. And I'm so grateful for that. So I think it's a little bit different than your coworkers. And that's to the relationship piece. I definitely kind of segment, there's networking and then there's relationship building. And that's the follow-up and continuation of the conversation. And I probably said all that while I'm on mute. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important, both in a professional setting and outside for personal. Through Women Tech Makers, I've also created a big community and have been part of a big community. Like Bri said, lifelong friends who we reach out to each other like for support with childcare, and reach out to each other for just like, hey, I need to like talk. Do you have time? This happened at work and I just want to bounce ideas off each other. Like, do you feel like this is normal? Like, so just creating your network to help support in times of like need. You're there for them, they're there for you. And I think personal networking, or whatever you want to call it, is very, very important as well.
I love that. I think something I want to double down on is that just asking, hey, this happened to me. Do you have time just to chat? Or, this thing, like, I'm not sure, does anyone, like, even just going to a community on Slack of just like, does anyone know anything about X? Because I'm curious about this part of it. You might get someone who's like, oh, I know, or I know somebody, and that's how you can kind of make those connections. And so I think that's part of it. It's a little bit vulnerability, which it can be scary. But honestly, the worst case is that no one says nothing, and that's fine. You're in the same spot. Nothing's really changed. But something that I like to think, or the way I frame it for myself, is I'm going to model behavior that I would love to have seen someone else do to make an environment or a space to feel safe. And so even when someone doesn't answer that specific question or respond back to me, I'm like, hey, you know what? I at least put it out there. And so someone else might be likely to ask a question too. So I think what Daisy was talking about, like just going, hey, there's something weird that happened. Can someone chat? I think is a great way to ask for support, but then also create a connection that's further than just, oh, we're talking about business and like work. That could transition to that more personal space within, a community that is safe. Of course.
An important part of what you mentioned, though, is including the specific part of why you want to chat, because there is very much a pit hole that you can fall into. If I get one more message on LinkedIn, hey, do you have 10 to 15 minutes to chat? Do you have a minute to chat?
But what?
Bro, I technically yes, but no, like, unless I know that there's if I know what I need to go into the conversation with. If I've known you for 10 years and you're like, do you have a minute to chat? I know that I need to make time to chat. But if you are early stage networking, Jessica like pointed out, there's a certain part of the technology, the certain part of this language or certain scenario that you're running into. Hey, does anyone have the time to chat about this? Now you're golden.
Absolutely. 10x. Just, from my own personal experience, my best friends I've met through tech events. And we're talking about people with, 10 plus years of friendship, right? There is something incredibly valuable about having someone who's gone through maybe not the same experiences, but similar experiences, to have people at different levels, almost in like, who are both friends and you are mutual mentors to each other. And, I can speak to like some of the other women's groups that I'm a part of. Some of them are a little smaller, a little, might be a secret society. I don't know. Just that you have like these people that you can ask, oh my gosh, I am trying to program this thing right now, and I am very pregnant, and all I want to do is like throw up and pass out. How do I get through this? Right? These are not questions you can post in the work Slack. There are so many things around just having someone that you can build a relationship with, that you can have mutual respect with, that you can have, and more than one, right? Let's look at the people in this room, right? And I'm also going to say, my friends don't necessarily represent the same age groups, the same background, the same sex, the same orientation, the same anything, right? So it's amazing what it can also introduce you to that might not be in your usual sphere of influence, just as a general thing. And it makes you better, makes you smarter, makes you more attentive, makes you learn not to invalidate your own feelings because somebody else might have it worse, but to validate your feelings and validate theirs too. And all of the things that are kind of around that. But when we talk about the value in your personal life, I think that's probably the least talked about, but probably the most contiguous part of what networking can get you. And Bri, when you talked about having friends in Seattle, I was in London last week for a work thing, and I was like, hey, I'm going to be in London. Who wants to meet up? And I was like, had one night of the Facebook friends and one night of the Google friends. And so, it's just such a gift to be able to, get to experience and get to know people. So from that standpoint, when was the first time early in your career? Because we have people who are early in their career, mid-stage career, learning how to network, right? Or getting better at networking. When did you first realize how valuable networking really was? Like, when were you like, oh, snap, if I hadn't have done this, this would not have happened?
There you go. I have two. I have two little stories. One was because I was transitioning from the nonprofit space into tech. It was really nice to go back to school as an adult, because I could appreciate the learning and like starting from scratch. Like, okay, cool. How would I want to enter this new field, clean slate? And so that was one of those opportunities. I was like, let me just really dive into and drill in, because in the nonprofit space, especially in small towns, it's a lot of who you know. And like, I wasn't from that small town, so I was an outsider. And so, you notice those things where people exclude you. Not fun. So that was one kind of moment that I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. I want to create my own little, find my people. So that's one. And then the second part is, I had no idea that because I was really involved in events and I really liked that part in meeting people, and that made me feel good. And then I started doing lightning talks and then technical talks, that one of those talks was, there was a recruiter sitting in the audience who went, ha, we like you. And then they emailed me going, hey, we're from Google. We would love to talk to you. Read that email, immediately deleted it, and then had to figure out, how do you undelete emails? Because this was back in like 2016. I didn't know about archiving. So by those little steps of just talking to people and like volunteering to help, you know, the sign-in sheet, and like taking on a little bit more responsibility little by little, then actually doing talks and feeling comfortable enough, it builds onto that. And so that's something that I think could be really hard to demonstrate or to see when you're new to the career, or you're seeing other people like the Bris and the Stacys and the Daisies of the world. I'm like, oh my gosh, they got their stuff together. And it's like, no, it all starts with these little small things, and you just don't know where they're going to lead to. And so it's doing what you're comfortable with that's a little outside of your scope, and just getting a little bit more, and like allowing that process to open you up and open yourself up to the world. That was very rose-colored glasses in a sense, but that has worked for me. I've seen it work for other people. And those are kind of the two things that really made me go, wow, that investment of like doing this free labor, because it is free when you're volunteering, really paid off for my career, which was nice. And I met a lot of amazing people along the way too. So it was like a twofer, great career, great friends, lovely.
Tana, I totally agree. Go ahead, Daisy. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, I mean, there were two moments that made me think of as well. And the first one was probably the first time I attended a Women in Technology International event in Dallas. I was probably maybe 1 year into my career, found this community, and I was like, oh, sweet, they're having an event in 2 weeks. And I show up and I realized that afterwards I was able to chat with this VP who is a VP at Slalom, and she had this amazing career. And she's like, yeah, we'd love your help. I immediately, it was such a great event. I immediately offered to volunteer. I was like, I'll bring balloons. I don't have the connections that you have, but like, I can bring something. And so for me, it was the exposure. All of a sudden I had quality time with higher ups and was like, okay, and they weren't talking down to me. This wasn't a boss peer supervisor kind of relationship. So for me, it was the clicking to, I can have this kind of direct contact with this level of person. And then the second answer to that is the moment that I took over the directorship of Women in Technology International for that same woman that I just mentioned, who is also now a lifelong friend. The first time I hosted a Women in Technology International event as the director, and the power of the value of networking in terms of being able to be the host and see the conversations and happening, the level of energy and like I was so hyped up with how many people I got to meet and it's sparking conversation for other people. I was like, I left and I was buzzing. I could not go to sleep. And so I think that there's kind of two different ways to think about the value of it. And yeah, I'll wrap there.
Yeah, I can frame this like in two different ways, but I think when I started seeing people apply for the same job with less experience, and maybe really like when you see their work ethic, it may have not been the same as yours, and you're just like, why are all these people like passing me up? Like you do get a little frustrated, but then you realize like, oh, they're networking, like they're going out, and like they may not have the experience, but they know how to talk to people. So it really is a skill that you have to like just have. I was held back from jobs before from a recruiter because they were telling me I didn't have the experience. And I just had to keep going back and forth with them and learning like how to advocate for myself. And that's a big part of when I started to see like, oh, okay, like when I network and meet people and they can also advocate for me, it's going to help me. So really just getting out of that the comfort zone of just, I'm going to apply and see if I get it. No, it's that other piece of that is to build your network.
To that point, if you are earlier in your career or you're at a point of transition, maybe you just finished up a boot camp and you're absolutely feeling the life is a black hole. Every time I apply to something, no one's getting back to me kind of thing. You know, when you are joining events like this, even if you're being able to speak up in the when there is an opportunity to like have your video on and speak up, people get to see you, but it could also be engagement in the chat. Because for example, I think it's, somebody in the room, we connected on LinkedIn. Chandel, for example, she's a director of engineering. She put her LinkedIn in the chat. I've already connected with her here. Say she's hiring, for example, by engaging, showing active parts in the community, she could be hiring. And so you're making direct connections with people who are hiring. And Daisy brought it up earlier that other people in your network see opportunity for yourself that you don't by showing up at user groups or community events. Somebody's like, wow, they show up consistently. They ask good questions. Yeah, I think we've got a position on their team. As a recruiter, I've seen many, many hiring managers not have an open job until they saw someone that they liked and had a good experience, and they created a job. It's all you need to know. They can create that job.
I think actually one of the most valuable things I did kind of earlier in my career, and this sounds bonkers, and it definitely was a little bit bonkers. For more than 10 years, I have been going to this executive conference in Dallas, Fort Worth. And imagine me more than 10 years ago, coming in, putting together the nicest kind of could be a pantsuit if I really tried kind of outfit. Really, it was just like, black pants and a cardigan, right? So I look reasonable because gosh knows. But I showed up, and I showed up authentically, and I didn't show up trying to be something or, necessarily trying to be, not airing of desperation, right? Like, but really just to say that, I'm out of place. I'm purposely putting myself in a situation where I am not like the people around me. Everybody here has at least an MBA and, substantial work experience, but there was no thing I had to check that said I was an executive on the, ticket. So, but I learned so many things in terms of that mindset. I came in with that mindset that said, hey, I'm going to learn at least some executive skills. I'm going to meet some people who are going to give me some idea of where I want to go or what I might be interested in. And I ended up networking with these people just by saying, yeah, I'm just here to learn and really to gain insight into where I think my career might go into the future. And when you talk to people with that authenticity, people respond. And I gained the connections that gave me the second connections to the people who, I might be asking about, hey, do you know how to do this? I see that we have a shared connection. If that shared connection has a VP, SVP, C-suite, whatever, senior director, whatever. Do you know how much people value those connections or people who are historically at that level? So if you say, oh, how do you know this person? That person's, in this whole other sphere. Oh, that you must be really good at what you do, or really whatever at what you do. That's where people's minds go. And so stepping outside of what you normally do and still being your authentic self can be one of the most valuable things that you can do for your networking and for your career. So if there's something that you want or are thinking about in terms of aspirational, just take a step out. I'm not an entrepreneur, not technically in the full-time sense. I've owned a couple of businesses that, did a Kickstarter, did all that kind of stuff, right? But I got tied into the Dallas Innovates and Dallas Startup, and I met so many people outside of my normal sphere of influence. There's all these different types of opportunities, and I really encourage people, like, just take a step outside, right?
Touch grass. No, I'm just
touch
kidding.
grass. Well, touch some much better
Yeah.
grass than yours. That's well, there's so many jokes right in there. I'm gonna let that slide.
Well, I want to build on it though, too, because I think something that I hear quite a bit, because I do get to talk about networking. If I get any chance to, I will talk about the power of like building relationships. But to your point of like, people get really scared when we talk about bringing your authentic self to networking, because they're like, my authentic self, pardon my French, is weird as hell. Okay, so that normally doesn't go super well. I might intimidate someone. I might be too much for someone. I might not have anything to say and get really awkward. And all of a sudden we're just breathing. I hear all of that from people. And I say, that's completely understandable. What I think is the tone to take is it's more about your authentic intention. What you have shown up somewhere. If you've taken the time out of your day to show up somewhere, it's more about bringing your authentic intention. Why are you here? Is it just to learn? Is it, I want to make more money? People appreciate authenticity in that way. Cool. You want to make more money? Let's talk about that. Oh, you're trying to build your network? Great. Let me introduce you to this person. The more they know your authentic intention for being there, they can trust you, because it builds trust. So I think that's something that I hear a lot about, is like being my authentic self. Oh, you really want me to be my authentic self? And you're like, well, yes, but it's more about your intention for why you're here.
And I pointed it out in the chat, but like one thing I would say about quote unquote people in power or people who are at that executive level, I feel like unless you make an impact, odds are they just forget you. So you either were super weird and they remember you for that, or you were super, just someone that they were found very interesting. But if you're neither of those things, the worst part of that is they're just going to forget you. They're not going to like come back at you. Like they don't have time for that. Right. So, let that take a little bit of the fear out of, position, power, or station. Because generally speaking, people are not going to take the time to go, oh, I met that person and here's my notes about this thing that I met them for 5 minutes at this one conference 10 years ago. Right. It's fine.
I have to tell you, one time being in sales for the cybersecurity company, is probably week 2 of the company, but my job is sales. I'm supposed to be selling things. I was like, do we have a website? No. What's the name of the company again? Right. But I'm just having to make calls. I cold called a CTO. And I got to tell you, I wasn't expecting her to actually answer the phone. Okay. I'm thinking she's got an assistant. I'm thinking she's too busy. She answers the phone. And I was like, I forgot my name. I could not have done worse. I'm talking ship, line, and sinker. She literally was like, I'm sorry, but how did you get my number? Why are you calling me? Like straight up says that on the phone. And I was like, I am so sorry. I thank you so much. And I'm pretty sure I hung up, but you know what I did is I followed up with an incredibly thoughtful, intentional email. So even if you are weird, even if you are completely blanking, blowing a conversation in person, what you can do is just follow up with them later and be like, I am normal. My bad. Was not expecting you to answer the phone. I said that in my email and she replied and we ended up having a designated meeting time. So you can absolutely recover even from the most awkward of scenarios with someone powerful.
And to that effect, we had a question from the audience. What advice do you have to maintain the connections you've made at an event?
So I love bringing a pen with me because I think business cards are still very much a real thing. So whether it's bringing a pen or using your notes on your phone, what I generally like to do is I'll write something on the back of the card, whether it be they mentioned this one thing. So I literally always look for like a hook of the conversation. There was one moment, they were both most likely going to remember discussing this one thing. And I'll try to write it down on my card, or after I've stepped away from the conversation with that person, I go straight to my notes app and write down, I mean, because I'm not going to, ideally you're talking to multiple people. And so I'll write down 1 or 2 things specific to that conversation. And that's what I'm using as a subject line in an email to them, or you know, something alluding to that, or it's what I'm including in a LinkedIn connection request or in a follow-up message. And so having that note, but then the second point I would say is just because you met them, unfortunately, doesn't mean that you're going to send one email and they immediately get back to you. So the power of follow-up in terms of like, not a second follow-up being like, hey bro, did you not see my message? Where you at? A second or a third follow-up, like, I really felt our conversation was impactful. I wanted to reiterate that I'm interested in talking with you about this. A little bit of the follow-up. And then, you know, using your best but least creepy internet sleuth skills to find someone. And then really, I would almost say, if you're open to buying someone coffee and spending $10 to buy them coffee, if you really felt they were valuable, within a asking them to buy them coffee, but with really great connections, if I can feel that there's someone I definitely for sure want to meet up with in the meeting, I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to send you an email in the next 24 hours. If I can buy you a cup of coffee, I'd love to do that. So you'll get an email from me here shortly. Like, I'm telling them what exactly I'm about to do.
I love that, Bri. I totally do the when I'm at physical events, I usually excuse myself and go to the restroom, and that's where I go sit down and get on myself. That's also a great way, because there are times when you're at events, you might end up talking to someone you don't really want to talk to. It has happened where some people, they might be looking for something different. So that's usually where I use the, oh, I have to go restroom, bye excuse. But I also do that when, you know, there's times where the conversation naturally ends, or you kind of can notice that the person's like wanting to go somewhere else, but like, oh, great to meet you, gotta go restroom, peace out. It's a nice graceful way to end the conversation, but then it also gives you time to write those down, those little notes. So I totally do that too, Bri. I love that we kind of do something a little similar. When it comes to virtual events, and even when it comes to my own, when I'm talking to people, even with my own friends, I have a doc that's called Folks. And I literally just write, as I'm talking to people, I just write down little notes of like, oh, okay. So I'm like, right now, a little thing about Bri that's new. And then I've already had one about Daisy and Stacy, of course, but like that way, like if we connect again, or if I need to ask something, I can go back and be like, what have we talked about? Because my memory is not the best and I can't necessarily depend on that. So that's how I kind of document where I'm at in conversations with multiple different people. And I also do that when I'm mentoring folks and when I'm talking to my mentor. So then I have one spot, everything lives there. I'm not having to overthink it. So that's one kind of part, or like one tactic that I use too. When it comes to you're chatting, you're meeting someone that you feel it might be more of a peer, I would even be honest and open and be like, hey, you seem really cool. I would love to just, continue talking and like, let them know kind of where you're at. It's not, people are not necessarily going to reject you, especially in person. They're not gonna be like, no, I will never be your friend. But like, people really enjoy when someone goes, hey, I find you really interesting. I know we have a lot of people we're meeting, but like, I would love to continue talking with you and see kind of what cool things we could talk about. And it could be as simple as that of like, I want to connect, and then you can move forward, get their link, whatever the transition happens, and then let that conversation end in a nice little spot and go meet more people too. Because I do think that, at least for me, I thought networking meant you go and meet someone and you talk them until you convince them to give you a job. Because I didn't know any better, because I don't come from a professional family, so I couldn't get tips and learn things from my own network. So it was something I had to learn as I was doing. And so that was something that I realized, like, oh no, part of it is just giving a nice impression, letting people know kind of who you are, and then you can move on. And some connections are going to be more fruitful than others, but none of them are going to be necessarily bad, because it's a great learning opportunity. You could test out different ways of saying things. So that's kind of how I like to view it, and some some tactical things I do within that space. I do love the fact what Bri said of, if it is someone that you're looking to have more of a mentor relationship or someone that you want to ask more advice, I think that might be a very different tactic of like being explicit of what the need and the offer is, compared to someone that's more of a peer. And you can think of it in those two ways. That way it might be easier for you. If you're like, oh, I'm scared of talking to the powerful people, you could play around with people who are your peers and like get comfortable within that. And then you can transition. Like, you don't have to do all the things all right now because we're talking about it. It's grabbing those little pieces and implementing those little spots that make sense for you and work for you.
To that point, oh no, go ahead, Daisy.
Sorry. No, I was just gonna say, like, I'll keep mine short. It's just following up with people, like both Jessica and Bri said, and then also another thing I like to do, because I host like tech events, is asking people to be speakers. That's a really good way to connect with people. I think Jessica actually hosted an event, and there was a speaker there. Her name was Noelle Silver. Is that right? Yeah. And I reached out to her after, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was blown away by, like your presentation. And I would love for you to speak at one of our events. We're a small community, and it was during COVID. So I was like, our numbers are going down, and I think like you would really be able to help us. She was at the time the VP of NPR, a VP at NPR, I think. And I didn't think she was going to respond, but she did. And she came like virtually. And then a year later, or last year, she came in person, flew herself over to Modesto and gave a talk here in Modesto. So that was, yeah. So you never know, like the power of that follow-up, or just like being genuine with like people, and like going back to Stacey's point, being your authentic self.
So where do you currently find your highest value? I know that, networking changes when you're early career versus later career. And I definitely also, I'll toss this in. I started the whole stickers thing, the Stacy stickers, just because it's the easiest way to introduce yourself to people who are introverts in the tech world and may not want to say hello back. Is that like you give them a sticker and say hi, or but that's an investment, I fully realize. Oh no, those are that's from like 2017 or 2018, one of those.
I was looking for your stickers. I'm like, I'm sure I have them somewhere, but I totally cleaned everything up, moved everything away. So
somewhere.
But I'm like, I know you did these, and these are so cute. Oh my gosh. And I had earrings too. Yes, those. Mm-hmm. I have the big ones and the little ones.
And I have glitter ones now. Ooh, okay. Special
Stacy?
fancy.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
Stacy? Are you saying that what you're doing when you're networking is you're like handing out swag?
Yeah.
Wow.
I just
Great
buy
idea.
I go through about 1,200 stickers a year, which means I also now have a way to quantify how many people that I've had a direct contact or impact with.
Okay.
Great idea.
So I know by how many packs I've gone through and how much I have left, how many people I've either usually directly had a contact with or directly influenced. And that's that also was a motivator to a certain, okay, that kept me with it like a little bit, because it's not free, right? Like this is throwing down like $500 a year on stickers, which is a significant amount of money. But when I look at what that is in terms of ROI, I absolutely know that those stickers have added tens of thousands of dollars to my yearly paycheck. So I'm totally cool with it. But that's something that I do. And I think it's really important that you find a touch point that works for you, a formula that works for you, because everyone is different. I found that it was a way for me to basically create an introduction where there wasn't any kind of pre-existing relationship or shared experience.
There's a question from Liz about whether this was after the conversation. I'm assuming that meant like giving out the stickers.
Oh no, I started with that. I
Right.
just literally walk up to people. I'm like, oh, do you want a sticker? And then they go, oh, that's cute. Or if they say no, I know that they don't want to talk to people and I walk away. Sometimes they can just want it and be like, oh, thank you. And then they return to their conversation. Sometimes they're looking at it as an opportunity to talk to someone or meet someone, because it's really intimidating on the other side too. And if we approach it from the standpoint that we are all people experiencing various levels of the same kinds of emotions in that same space, then we don't put ourselves under the same pressure of, well, I need to perform or I need to this. And, you know, I personally, I also totally go into performance mode. Yes, song and dance. You know, I'm on it. I make sure I get up early that day. I get my coffee, you know, get my hair did, get my eyes done, right? All of those things. But, you know, that's everyone figures out what their formula is over time. That was not me originally. Me originally is showing up in my Old Navy black pants and cardigan, just trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life.
I love it. I did something similar when I was transitioning from nonprofit to tech. I printed out business cards with my face that folded, and that when you open it, you can write notes. And so I used to carry on pens because I'm like, okay, how do I get people to talk back to me or to remember me? And so it's like old school business cards. Yeah. And I remember people like, there were some recruiters that literally laughed at me, but they called me back. They reached out to me because they remembered me. And I used to write like, that way I took the onus off of them to remember me. I'm like, oh, cool. Want to keep talking? Let me write down what we're talking about. Here's my card. That way, you know who I was. I did that like 7 years ago. And that was something that was a little gimmicky, a little fun. Not a huge investment, but was really fruitful for the, oh, that's a little different. Oh, which I do think if you're going to do it, stickers is the way to go. Yeah. And I do love what Stacy was talking about. It's not, you don't have to entertain people necessarily. Like you're not there to connect with everybody. It's okay to be a little more picky and be like, thanks, but no thanks. Because it's all about honoring yourself too and figuring out what you need. I know something that I like to do when I go to an event, I don't know anybody, which is not as common anymore, but it does happen. Is I usually walk up to people who are kind of alone and be like, hey, you know what to do? Like, I'm alone too. Seems like you're alone. Do you want to talk? We can be awkward together, and that's okay. That way you can at least start a conversation. And then I usually, when I'm talking to one person, kind of keep an eye out, because usually when you're talking to someone, other people walk by and they're like, like they want to get in, but they don't know how. That's usually when I go, hey, come on in, like actively invite them in, have them introduced. And then I usually, after there's a little bit of chit chat, go, cool, I have to go to the potty. And then I normally leave, do my notes, rinse and repeat, come back out and be like, oh, you're alone, and try to like make these triads and then walk away when the conversation's nice and good and high. So people have a good impression of like me. So that's another kind of tactic they do to try to make connections happen, whether they're fruitful or not. I at least help someone else. They might think of me as someone as a connector too. And then another part when you're actually at events is being able to go, like if I see Stacy and I'm talking to someone, she will come and hug me. And I love to be able to go like, hey, see, this is so-and-so, and like make those connections as that's happening. And usually that's when a sticker happens. Actually, normally a sticker usually like slides into my handle. Like, now that I'm thinking about it, usually kind of just do a little side of my head, and that's a great way to kind of connect and support one another. So you could even use the people you already have to meet other people and kind of build off of that, and then have folks think of you again as that person that knows people. Like Bri was talking about before, I don't know a lot of things, but I know people who do. Is a great persona or great reputation to have.
When we talked about in terms of phrases, because I think if you really hate networking, sometimes your anchors can just be like 2 conversation starters or phrases to use. So you mentioned one of them is like your industry or interests intersection. Where do your worlds collide, right? But then to her point on this one, a first line, how in the world are you even saying hi to someone? So what brought you here? My immediate question is getting right to the heart of why the heck are you here? I'm immediately asking for your intention of why you've spent time to come somewhere. So what brought you here? First line, great one out of the gate. In terms of like where do I get the highest value? I'm not sure if my initial thought would be like, I use Eventbrite. I stock Eventbrite, and I'm happy to go to any community or event one time. And that doesn't mean that I will go again. I make a mental note of this was a valuable room for me to be in, or if it wasn't, that's fine as well. And it's just not something I return to. But I think we're throwing a lot of ideas, but at the same time, it really is just, somebody said it earlier, it's just the power of showing up. You can show up to a room and an event and say nothing. You could literally talk to no one, but you know what the value from it will be is that if you're interviewing, you can mention, well, I was at the React user groups meetup last week. You didn't talk to anybody, but you just mentioned it in an interview, and they know that you're involved. They know that you're there. And so I think that the value can be extracted in a lot of different ways, that you don't have to talk to a ton of people. But if you are there, you're able to reference it and use it even in a conversation with your boss. Oh, I was interested in picking up in any opportunities that you have for me to work with React. I actually went to their user group last week, so I've definitely been trying to learn from them. You can use it in these unique ways, and that's where networking for me can be valuable and applied in different ways.
I love that. I'm literally taking notes too. Just as an FYI, I've been taking notes the whole time about everybody. Like, just because someone is quote unquote on a panel, like, does not mean that we do not also go, ooh, what is all these other people doing, and kind of pick and choose what tricks and tips work for us right now.
And I want to call out that Gemma Dean has her hand raised.
Thank you, Stacy. So I just wanted to ask a question about, once you go to an event and you're meeting people and maybe you have a conversation, maybe you connect with them on LinkedIn, do you have any good strategies for, staying in touch over time?
Yeah, I think for me, it's like checking in, like, hey, are you going to this event? I'll be there. Like Stacy, I've been to multiple events Stacy's been to, and we connect that way. We may not talk for a while, but then when we see each other, it's like, oh, hey, Stacy. So definitely just like asking people, are you going to this event, or inviting them to events and saying like, hey, did you hear about this event? Like, hope to see you there. That's one way to stay connected. And then another way is just like liking and commenting on their posts on LinkedIn, things like that. Like if you see something interesting, just comment on that and say like, hey, I really like this, or just give your feedback to them, because I think they find that valuable as well.
Absolutely. There's kind of 2 other phrases that I will also use. And again, this is making it all sound like I'm super planned out and like I always have an idea. I will say a lot of this is organic, and it's just because we're bringing it up that I'm like, oh, I do that. But I will definitely, if I see an industry article, a lot of us may start our day on whether it's, TechCrunch or, industry insights, some sort of network, or some sort of news site, if you will. I'll send an industry article. I thought you would appreciate this. This made me think of you. It's not asking for anything other than maybe being in front of them. And that's, I think, at the end of the day, just commenting on their posts and liking their posts, that is incredibly valuable. And I think is the easiest form of networking, because your name is in front of them. They're like, oh yeah, Bri, what's she up to? They think it. They don't have to do anything other than think it, and they've heard my name. But if you do want more of a over time closer connection, I think if you can, hey, now that you're a product manager, I thought you might find this interesting, and you send them some news about Scrum or something like that, and send an article, and it's just I was thinking about you, this made me think of you, thought you would appreciate it. That's all you need to do. Keep it simple.
That's a great follow-up to just say, hey, I remember the last time we talked, you were looking at this career path. Is there anything I can do to help you with that? Or anybody I know that can, bring you a little further along? It's, and maybe one thing that we're not talking about is you sharing and you posting and you kind of putting in that effort is also you still connecting with other people. Whether, by allowing them the ability to participate in where your thoughts are too. There's a lot of information and study around this, especially from, individual community building with influencers, but you don't have to be an influencer to be kind of the head of your own sphere of influence or to be active in your own sphere of influence, if that makes sense. And so, it doesn't have to be that you have to put in all the individual legwork. Sometimes just sharing parts of your thoughts and learnings and everything else is auto-generative, if that makes sense.
I lean towards that side of it, Stacy. I think scale. I want to do the least amount of work and get the most impact. And so I definitely do a lot of, especially for even for this event. I know last week I was like, hey, I'm going to meet and hang out with amazing people. Come join us. And just that kind of blanket invite is one, it helps pop you up. People see your face, then they see that you're active and that you kind of go above and beyond. But that's, I think, sometimes can be seen as well, yeah, because you're on the panel. Even before, even when I'm going to this event. I find this I'm really excited to see so-and-so, tagging them into that post of I'm excited for their talk, or, I have my lineup of things I want to learn, and tagging all those people and the organizations. That way it can get other people to know what you're doing and what you're interested in, which feels a little strange at first of who's going to care, but it's amazing how people do care, or people find kind of what Bri was talking about of sharing cool things that you find with other people just helps people to, again, think of you as a person of oh, you know things and you know how to find things. That's pretty cool.
It doesn't, and it doesn't have to be about you. It's by you posting about an event, somebody who never heard of Women Who Code was wait a second, what's Women Who Code? Mm-hmm. And then you're just you gotta shift your brain from I'm promoting myself to I'm sharing information.
And sometimes that's what we got to do, because it could feel a little icky. It could feel a little strange, especially from coming from different cultures. It could be different cultures, plus being a woman. We can get into that in some other time. But yeah, reframing it for yourself of how can I make this feel less icky? And in all transparency, I remember writing my first blogs and literally going up to my partner or to friends, because I was at a software boot camp, and be like, Kristen, can you push enter? Because I can't actually push the button to post the post and publish it. Can you do this for me? And I would have to do that because there was that mental strange thing. Talk to my therapist. I'm all good now in that regards of accepting that it's okay to take space. But if that's what you need to do, that is okay to do that. It's okay to ask for support. If you're in a spot where you're just this all sounds fun, I just don't know what the first step is, asking for that support is more than a fine idea, because other people will have those issues, and potentially you can meet somebody and hey, we're going to be pals, and try to figure out how do we network together and create a relationship that way that's peer-to-peer, that you never know, that person might end up becoming the next XYZ, and you know that person from early on. So
Well, we're
Stacy.
kind of at time here, and I want to give everyone an opportunity to just give us the 60-second elevator pitch of what are you up to and where can we find you to learn more, not learn out more, learn more.
Hey, Miss Stacy, could I use my time to answer one of the questions that someone
Yes,
is?
absolutely.
Okay, Hop, I saw your question about being a recruiter and how do you feel about a random stranger messaging you and asking for time to talk about a job posting? And, you know, there's a catch-22 here. In some ways, as the candidate, you're thinking it's showing that I'm interested. It's showing that I'm calling out a specific job. I'm being intentional. And that is all good. The other side of it is recruiters are tasked with talking with so many candidates every day. It's and this is at scale. If you're reaching out to a bunch of recruiters for this, it gets a little bit tricky. And I just want to say that some are definitely not going to have a conversation, but that's mostly because they may not have a job that that is even relevant to be discussing. You're mentioning a specific job in your comment, but a lot of times I get messages, hey, do you have time to chat about my job search? And I'm like, would love to, but ultimately that's why I've created something called Roadmap to Getting Hired, because I was getting a ton of outreach to be able to talk about job search. And I was like, man, if I did that, I would literally be on the phone every day with candidates, which ultimately is something I would love to do. But that led me to create this other thing. I think if you are reaching out to a recruiter, you don't know them, they've never heard of you, you've never had a conversation, it's fabulous. You have to follow up with a recruiter after you apply to a job. But when you do follow up, I would encourage you in the message to say, point out one thing in the job description that you have a question about. You can talk about more, but if I were to get a message from a candidate that's saying, hi, I saw this job posting, I've applied, and I would love to talk with you for 5 or 10 minutes about this one bullet point that mentions they're open to all of these languages. What's their priority? If I know a specific tactical question from that, I love the way that you think, because that's not a message I normally get from candidates. I absolutely normally get, can I borrow 5 or 10 minutes of your time to talk about this job? But if I know specifically what you want to talk about, I'm down. So that was my 2 cents. But also, other than that, there is Roadmap to Getting Hired, and you can just connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll add my profile in the chat.
I too am on all the social media platforms. More than happy to connect. I've not skilled myself like Bri, which I've always thought about, but I find it, especially when it comes to people transitioning into tech, I am more than happy to sit down and have a conversation for like half an hour. I normally have them for 25 minutes. So if you want to connect and talk to somebody, I appreciate it when other people do that to me. So I think of it as paying it forward. Plus I get to meet a lot of cool people, and it's been interesting how usually once they get jobs, that's another person I can know. Like, it's great for future Jessica too. So more than happy to sit down and to chat. I also offer folks, like, if you just need somebody to go like, rah, 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 you're amazing, and like get you excited before an interview, or like to get you in a great mind space of like, remember you did this, and like hype you up. I love doing things like that too. I love to do that. And then also when things are kind of not so great, I'm also really available for that too, of just like, yeah, this is hard, and this is really hard and not what we expected, and that's okay. And to help counter some of that negative parts. But yeah, I'm still on that one-to-one space. But most likely I'm gonna take Bri's little thing, and that might be a really great resource. I'm gonna be able to like send people off of like, after we chatted, ta-da!
Daisy had to run. She had her daughter's first soccer game. So, but she did include her LinkedIn or her website there. So we will definitely have to connect with Daisy as well. Anything else? Let's see.
Hey,
Okay.
I'm so happy that was helpful.
Yes. Trust me, like I think there was somebody else in Washington as well. So by all means, if anybody has any recommendations, I'm going to take my own advice here. If you know any communities in Seattle that I need to be plugging into, by all means, please let me know.
We just had a panelist on recently from Seattle who's very involved in the tech scene. So if you want an introduction,
Yeah.
I can, hey, we're networking in the networking like a pro.
Woo!
Come on.
It's called modeling.
meta.
See, we're just, that's how people learn behaviors, right? By modeling. So we just demonstrated how easy it is. They're like, oh,
Yes.
I'm in need. Let me just start out there. I love it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's really once you kind of do this a lot, as Bri's made a lot of connections and like I'm pretty sure that Jessica, you could go pretty much anywhere in the world and have at least one friend.
I like making friends.
And you know what's so crazy is this comes up and we can stop the recording at some point, but
Oh yes, I just
Yeah.
wanted to say thank you to our wonderful panelists, Bri, Jessica, and Daisy, and our host Stacy. I'm sorry, and for an amazing event. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.